what we're going to do is we're going to try and create the ultimate top 15 of Ring of Honor World Champions. And there could be recent names in there, past names. Obviously, it's got an 18-year history, so quite a few names to choose from. But when I was doing my research, I was quite surprised to see that in the 18 years, there's only been 27 world champions. So I just assumed in my head, without doing the research, there would have been more. So out of the 27, we're going to be looking at 15 of those combined. So the point of this game and this kind of topic is for each of us to come to the table with 5 wrestlers that we consider to be either the best or most important Ring of Honor world champion for whatever reason, and to kind of state our claim or to state our case as to why that person is on our list and should be in the ultimate 15. It won't be in any particular order. There won't be a ranking system 1 through to 15. It will just be, right, you're in the 15. There we go. That's kind of our list. So we're going to start with, let's start with Oliver then. So who is first on your list? Who's the first player out of your list of 5 then, Oliver? And state your case very clearly as to why you think this wrestler, as a former Ring of the World Champion, should be in our ultimate 15.
Yeah, for me, this is kind of my era and stuff. So I guess not in any particular order, but I'm going to go with this person first, Austin Aries. To topple Samoa Joe after his historic title reign, to like come into the company, but in a huge way at Generation Next 2004, and then another 7 months later, you've beaten the ROH World Champion at that point. He did it in a fantastic way. The fans went crazy for the finish. They loved the title change. And then Austin Aries went a different way with the ROH World Title. He took it around the world and defended it. I think there was one match where he defended it in Mexico against Ricky Marvin and Super Crazy. So, just that really. He had like a 6-month reign, maybe a little bit longer. And, just an explosive wrestler. Fantastic on the ground in terms of technical wrestling and submission wrestling. The crucifix bomb was something he made famous, and the 450 splash as well. He did it with such grace and style, and just a really amazing wrestler and well worthy of being ROH World Champion.
Definitely. And he only won the championship once, didn't he? But he held the title for about 6 months, from December 04 through to June 05. So he had a good run. Like I say, we have seen him kind of float through the WWE, and he was was he the cruiserweight champion at one point? He certainly wrestled for the championship. I think it was in a pre-show at WrestleMania, so he was certainly in the mix there. But Stephen, any thoughts on Austin Aries?
Yeah, actually.
You might need to correct him there, Stephen.
He was a 2-time Ring of Honor World Champion.
Oh, was he?
He won the title. Yes, he won the title back in 2009. And then he had a great feud with Tyler Black. Yeah, so he held the title for about 270 days in 2009. He was the first 2-time champion in Ring of Honor history as well. So, yeah, absolutely. Austin Aries. He reminds me very much of Chris Jericho in the sense that he was always able to reinvent himself, cocky but able to, back it up. He was always able to deliver in the ring, versatile, very technically sound. The matches he had against Alex Shelley, the matches he had against Bryan Danielson, Tyler Black, Davey Richards, Roderick Strong. He always was able to mold to his opponents, and that win against Samoa Joe when he actually won the championship at Final Battle 2004 was probably the biggest moment at that point in Ring of Honor history, if not the biggest moment, in that you're toppling the kind of mythical champion who nobody can stop. The fact that Austin Aries was able to do that, if you see the clips online, you can see how the crowd reacted, and it was unreal. You never thought it would actually happen. And then when it did, it was just, unreal. And how he was able to then carry the championship forward from there was, a real feat in itself. So definitely agree with Austin Aries being in this top 15.
Stephen, let's have your number one pick then.
Yeah, so it has to be the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. When I think of the Ring of Honor World Championship, always think of Bryan Danielson's historic and innovative reign. He wrestled everyone and anyone. He was at his peak in 2005 to 2006 when he held the belt. He was just so crisp, so good. Nobody was better than him. The feud he's had with Roderick Strong, as I just mentioned, the feud he's had with Nigel McGuinness and Oliver. My envy was actually at Unified, where he faced Nigel McGuinness in a title versus title match for the Ring of Honor Pure Championship, as well as the Ring of Honor World Championship in Liverpool, which was one of the greatest matches in Ring of Honor history. He had incredible matches against Lance Storm. He was just able to wrestle everybody, create great matches with everyone, and he just held the championship like a true champion. The aura he held with the belt was just like nobody else. I mean, the match as well, just to mention as well, with Kenta that he had in New York in Ring of Honor's debut in the Manhattan Center at Glory by Honor 5 Night 2 was probably the greatest Ring of Honor World Championship match I think I've seen. And that's a hard thing to admit, but like, because there's been so many, but he just was on a tear against everyone, and no one compares. You can watch any Bryan Danielson defense, and every one of them's different. Every one of them is just wonderful to watch. He read the crowd, the psychology was on point, and he just left it all in the ring. And he held that championship like it was his life. Like when you hear about these wrestlers of old who, like Ric Flair, would hold the championship like it was, their baby or whatever. And Bryan Danielson always had that aura of being a pure world champion. So definitely Bryan Danielson for me.
Oliver, I don't think either of us can disagree with that. I mean, we've seen what success he's had since he left Ring of Honor in WWE, of course, and I think he's a 7-time WWE heavyweight champion. But in Ring of Honor is where he kind of made his name and where he created huge fans because of his style, his hard-hitting style, and his kind of tough spirits. But you definitely back up Stephen's first choice there.
No, I strongly disagree.
No chance, surely.
No, of course not. But if you want to talk about having matches and molding against any opponent, there's a match on YouTube, Bryan Danielson versus Kamala for the ROH World Title. So that's how good this guy was and what he could do. There's no ROH without Bryan Danielson. He kind of found himself when he went on the tour of Europe in 2005. He come back. He was a super serious wrestler, and then he beat James Gibson at Glory by Honor 4, and he just went on from strength to strength. Mr. Small Package. I've got top 5 in terms of not being disqualified when he's doing a submission or nefarious hold. He made that famous. Obviously, the music, the final countdown is iconic because of him. As Stephen mentioned, I saw him and Nigel McGuinness tear it up in Liverpool, where you probably would have sold your mother for a Nigel McGuinness win. That's how heated the building was. He had different matches with different opponents, and every single time he brought it. And with regards to what Stephen said about the Kenta match, I've seen that, and it's spectacular. I can't disagree, although I did jokingly at the beginning with Stephen's number one pick there.
There we go. Well, my first pick is Kevin Steen. We all know him from WWE as Kevin Owens, of course. He only won the Ring of Honor World Title once. I believe that's correct. And his reign lasted for 328 days, and he won the championship. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was in May 2012, and it was in Toronto at Border Wars when he beat Davey Richards. So Steen was the first ever Canadian-born wrestler to win the Ring of Honor World Title. He was battling the likes of El Generico, Eddie Edwards, Davey Richards around that time. Steen had a successful title defenses against Generico at Final Battle, Doomsday 2012 in that epic ladder match, as well as successfully defending against Jay Lethal at their 11th anniversary show, before dropping the championship to Jay Briscoe at Supercard of Honor 7 in April 2013. So Steen did have one more crack at the Ring of Honor World Title in May 2014, I understand, against then champion Adam Cole, but was defeated in one of his final matches for Ring of Honor before making the move to NXT. So, guys, my first pick is Kevin Steen. Like I say, he was Ring of Honor World Champion for about 11 months, if I'm not mistaken, in 2012 through to 2013. Any thoughts on my number one pick?
Yeah, can't disagree with it, John. You know, I watched that reign from start to finish. Steen was at his peak. The win against Davey Richards, which you mentioned at Border Wars, was incredible. The crowd were loving it. Every match, again, a bit like Bryan Danielson he had, was, you know, very heated. They were very fun. They were all unique. The undertones of the feud as well with Generico fed through everything. And one of my favourite endings to any show ever was at Glory by Honor 11, the Unbreakable Hope, where he had this incredible match against Michael Elgin, one of the most underrated Ring of Honor World Championship matches of all time. And then at the end, he was handed a box by, I believe it was Carrie Silkin, the ambassador for Ring of Honor, former owner. And that then he opened the box at the end of the show and it had El Generico's mask in it, and the crowd went absolutely nuts because they knew that it was going to be at Final Battle, as you mentioned, the ladder war between himself and El Generico. So those feuds were being undertoned as well, which were even more heated because it was for the Ring of Honor World Championship. Incredible promos as well. He was able to carry himself on the mic as much as in the ring. And he always just delivered the goods no matter what. And he helped a lot of fans stay with Ring of Honor, I think, during a time when Ring of Honor was losing a lot of momentum due to a lot of different transitions in the company. But definitely needs to be in this list, absolutely.
Superb. Oliver.
No, but for me, like Kevin Steen, like way back to like 2008, he was tagging with Al Generico, and like he was taunting his own tag team partner to make the tag, and I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but I got to keep tabs on him because he's hilarious. And then seeing him in the ring, and just a love for him from those days in Orlando in 2008. And then, that kind of led to his campaign and kind of against Ring of Honor, and the fans stuck with him and kind of brought him back to Ring of Honor because he lost a match, if I'm correct, Stephen, and couldn't wrestle in Ring of Honor for a long time. Is that correct?
Yeah. The fight without honor against Jericho, yeah.
Yeah, and the fans stuck with him and brought him back, and then he turned because he's at his best when he's a heel. And like you mentioned, the Border Wars match against Davey Richards, going up against one of the very best in the world, and he was able to, a beast him kind of thing. And then, Kevin Steen had a fantastic title run. It's like I said, I was watching sporadic shows at the time, so I can't say too much, but I remember like the message boards. He blew up the message board in the end, didn't he, Stephen? If I'm correct.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. So that's the reason there's no more ROH message board, because it was one of the premier things on the internet. Was going up against the company higher ups who didn't want him to be as popular as he was. So it's very Steve Austin in WCW kind of vibe that I got from it. And obviously the cream rose to the top and he became ROH World Champion. And yeah, very, very worthy of being on this list. So, yeah, to my second pick, I'm going to go with James Gibson. Even though he had a very short ROH run, every match he was in was superb, to the point where ROH management thought that he needed to be the champion. And yeah, they built him up and it was because of like the summer of Punk and CM Punk wouldn't defend the title and what have you, and it all comes to a crescendo with Samoa Joe, CM Punk, Christopher Daniels, and James Gibson. Gibson gets taken out of the match, but comes back bloody Crimson Mask and beats CM Punk just before he goes to WWE, and the fans were electric for it. Even though he didn't have the title for a very long time, losing it quite quickly at Gloria Bonner against the aforementioned Bryan Danielson. When he went into the company on a opportunity, and within so many months was the ROH World Champion. And I think that's a fantastic Cinderella story from somebody who's been underrated for the very longest time, and definitely deserved his due as ROH World Champion.
Yeah, and Stephen, your thoughts on Oliver's second pick there?
Yeah, James Gibson was a man who, had for that point been synonymous with WWE and the cruiserweight division, and he was taken away from WWE or released under very bad circumstances at the time, I believe. And he came into Ring of Honor very hungry and very intent on showing his worth, and the fans were always behind him in every match, and every match he delivered the goods. And that moment when he did win the championship, as Oliver mentioned, was a wonderful Cinderella story, and the crowd were just so behind him. And his matches and his reign wasn't very long, in the sense that it wasn't a historic reign in terms of defenses or in terms of amazing matches. There were some great matches, but the actual moment of him winning overshadowed anything else, and that, passing the torch to Bryan Danielson to then have his incredible reign, as I just mentioned, I think shows how selfless and how sort of professional he was, or he is, as an actual professional wrestler. So I can't disagree with Oliver's pick there for James Gibson.
Am I right in thinking that James Gibson is the former Jamie Noble in WWE?
Yes.
He is.
Yeah. Because I don't think they really kind of gave him the opportunity to demonstrate his, I don't know, he was more of a character wrestler in WWE, wasn't he? More of a gimmick, would you agree, as opposed to being the solid wrestler that he presented himself as in Ring of Honor?
Yeah,
Jamie Noble, boy.
They never used him to the best of their abilities, did they?
No, I mean, he's a very technically sound wrestler with a lot of technical expertise. And he, should have been used a lot more. He should have been allowed to be able to stretch himself a lot more, but he wasn't given that opportunity, sadly.
Yeah,
he definitely had a fantastic feud against the Hurricane for the Cruiserweight title when he was with Nidia, to be fair. They had some fantastic matches, and I know it was more character-driven, but he was able to show his wrestling chops then. But in terms of, I mention this because I've said this to Stephen, it wasn't a title match, but one of the matches you need to kind of seek out if you want to see how good James Gibson is a match at ROH Stalemate against Austin Aries. It's truly one of my favourite ROH matches of all time.
There we go. Stephen, let's have your second wrestler on your list of 5 then.
Yeah, so I was looking down this top 20 what I sent, and I want to mention this wrestler because I just have to, because he's one of my favourites. Nigel McGuinness has to come in there. British-born, historic reign. He held the Ring of Honor World Championship for over 500 days. the only Ring of Honor champion to hold the championship for a full calendar year from January to December. Wrestled everyone and anyone round the world, had a historic feud against Takeshi Morishima, continued his feud against Bryan Danielson. He just carried the championship again like it was his life, and it was his life. Nigel wrestled his heart out in every match he took. He held that belt, like his life depended on it. And I believe he was the first British-born world champion of a wrestling organisation for a United States company in over, at that point, before Nick Aldis won the NWA championship, in over about 60 or 70 years. So the prestige of holding, or being given the opportunity to hold a belt of that, magnitude, was something I know I've heard him say he was incredibly proud of. Fantastic promos once again. His charisma was on point, and every match was always a great story. Every match was always a roller coaster. And the thing why I have such passion for Nigel is that if you watch a lot of his matches in the latter part of his Ring of Honor career, when he was the champion, he was very badly injured. He was in a lot of pain. He was wrestling like a wounded man, basically, but he would not give up that belt no matter what was thrown at him. He had to hold that belt, and he wrestled because he had such passion for the company he was wrestling for and the belt he was holding, that he wouldn't want to let his fans down. And when he lost the championship to Jerry Lynn, I actually tweeted recently about this because Ian Riccoboni put it up, but it was one of the most emotional matches I think I've seen, because he was in such pain, but he was so respectful with what he did. A lot like when Brett won the championship from Kurt Hennig at SummerSlam 91, but he did the job to him and he did the right thing, and they shook hands, they followed the code of honor. He withheld that championship moniker from start to finish, and it was a reign which, much like Bryan Danielson's, I always hold close to my heart, in that he was a true world champion, and he always will be to me. So he has to be up there for me.
And he was also the longest reigning pure champion as well, 350 days. So he's got two kind of distinctive, kind of championship reigns within Ring of Honor. He was the third longest reigning world champion in Ring of Honor with 545 days. That single reign between October 07 and April 09. And then we kind of know the history that. That epic match in Liverpool, the unification match with Bryan Danielson, I know we've already touched on it a couple of times in this episode already, but they even highlighted it on the Nigel McGuinness documentary that they did on the WWE Network a couple of years ago. But Oliver, Nigel McGuinness, we all know that his career was cut short, and what he could have achieved. His dream was always to, get onto the WWF stage and WWE stage, and become world champion. And he saw one of his best friends in Bryan Danielson, achieve and live out his dream at WrestleMania in 2014. But Nigel McGuinness, had he not suffered so many injuries, maybe it was due to his wrestling style and the way that, his kind of strong style that he presented in every single match, where he kind of gave 110% every single time. But his career could have been so much more, just through circumstances that were unfortunate to him. But Oliver, your thoughts on Nigel McGuinness?
Yeah, just quickly, I love the Bret Hart Mr. Perfect reference from SummerSlam 91 there, Stephen.
Yeah.
As that's the day I became a wrestling fan, so that was good. In terms of Nigel, had everything. Unfortunately, with regards to WWE, he was too honest. He told them about an injury. They said, you need to get it fixed.
Yeah.
He didn't have the money to get it fixed. So that's what happened there. And then he went to TNA and tore it up with Kurt Angle, and those matches need to be seen to be believed. But yeah, he has the kind of passion that me and Stephen have for the ROH review, I think. As a wrestler, he had absolutely everything. And, with people coming back like Edge and Daniel Bryan and just recently Corey Graves training possibly for an in-ring return, who knows? Maybe Nigel will get that itch again and The WWE fans will be forever grateful if that happens. But in terms of what Stephen's saying about him being one of the top picks, without a doubt, if we were to put this into 1, 2, 3 to 15 and stuff, he's inside the top 3. Not quite sure where in that top 3, but definitely inside it. It was an absolute pleasure and honour to see the Danielson McGuinness match that we aforementioned in Liverpool. A fantastic setting, and like I said, it's not hyperbole. People would have sold family members for Nigel to be the champion. At that point, the crowd was molten, and then wrestling through injuries. We talk about respecting wrestlers. I respect every wrestler that steps into the ring, whether you like them or not. It doesn't really matter. They're putting their livelihoods on the line. They're away from their families for so many days a year. They have, I'm sure, mine, Stevens, and yourself, John's utmost respect. And for Nigel, he wrestled injured for a lot of the title reign, but refused to lose the title. That's how much it meant to him, and that's why the ROH World Title held such prestige as it does today. But during Nigel's reign, it was like, wow, this is pretty close to being the top title in the world. And he made that so by amazing performance after amazing performance and wrestling through injuries. And I got to see one of the most amazing performances once again in Orlando as he took on Austin Aries at Supercard of Honor 3. And, you could see then he just gave everything he had in that match. And that's what he did throughout the entire title run.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I'm going to give you guys my number 2 pick then. Now, this might surprise some because it's quite a recent world champion, but I think for what this kind of championship reign did for this individual, and what this person has done in quite a lengthy career, and then recently coming back to prominence, has got a lot to kind of tell about, a bit of a fairy tale story. And of course, I'm talking about PCO. Now, PCO, I think he only won the championship late last year, but he's been in the wrestling business for 25 years, and a lot of us first came across him 26 years ago, around 1994, when he's part of the Quebecers. We had a fairly good run there with a WWF tag team championship run or two with the Quebecers there. But then after that, he kind of floated around North America, did a stint in WCW, a stint in TNA many years later. He's been floating around the Indies, but then he kind of disappeared, and it came into prominence around about 2016, 2017, where he kind of got noticed more on the independent scene. And I think he was already into his early 50s by then. And then he signed a deal with Ring of Honor in 2018. Quite soon into his deal with Ring of Honor, he got signed. He joined the Villain Enterprises and soon became tag team champions with Brody King. And I think 6-man tag team champions with Marty Scurll thrown into the mix as well. And then towards the end of 2019, he won the Ring of Honor World Championship. Now, he was only champion for 78 days, and then I think he beat Roosh to be the champion, and then lost to Roosh kind of I think it was a couple of months ago before we all went into lockdown. But the reason why I put PCO on the list is because of kind of the fairy tale resurgence of almost a forgotten wrestler, to be honest with you, and coming back and doing what he's been able to do. He's always reinvented himself into this Frankenstein's monster character, but essentially he's kind of reinvented himself so that he's kind of more of a prominent, more of a relevant wrestler in the year 2018, 2019, 2020, modern day times, for somebody of his age that's been in wrestling, a kind of almost the forgotten journeyman, you could say. But my number 2 wrestler is PCO for all of them reasons, and I think that although he's Ring of Honor World Championship reign may not be one of the most memorable or glorified World Championship reigns in Ring of Honor, I think for what that championship did for his career and what he's been able to do as part of kind of the more modern Ring of Honor, definitely needs to be recognised. So, Stephen, your thoughts on PCO and kind of my entry number 2 on my list in the Ultimate 15?
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy who I actually didn't put in my top 20, but I can't disagree with any of what you've said, John. And myself and Oliver, when PCO actually won the championship back at Final Battle last year, we were just, loving it, in the fact that this man, a lot of people were critical of him at the time, saying, oh, he's, degrading the Ring of Honor World Championship. He's not one of the best in the world, and all this. But PCO has consistently throughout 2019 delivered some of the best matches in Ring of Honor, and he's one of the most over talents in the company and one of the most marketable characters in the company and wrestlers. And he, at the age what he's at, at the age he is, and how he's able to wrestle, I think is an absolute sort of miracle, in the sense that he's doing some of the stuff which even younger guys would be crazy to do, and he's still able to do it. And that actual championship win was a great moment, in that it was much like the, WrestleMania kind of fulfilling of a childhood dream. And, one of the recent episodes of Ring of Honor Wrestling, which myself and Oliver reviewed, there was actually a post-match speech which he gave, which wasn't on the live show, which was only exclusive to the TV deal, where he was very humbled and, very, thankful for what he'd been given in Ring of Honor and the opportunity. And I think sometimes, the one thing about a reign is the actual way you win the belt as opposed to how you hold the belt. And for PCO, that journey from being, one of the Quebecers and his early career in Canada and being floating about the Indies, and then to come back and then get signed and go through Villain Enterprises and become the Ring of Honor World Champion, has truly been, as you mentioned, a Cinderella story. And, I do actually believe that he is one of the top Ring of Honor World Champions, in the sense of that, in terms of his defenses and his match quality, maybe not so, but if you're looking at a full round package, there's no way that he can't be in that top 15 for me now, definitely up there.
Yeah. Oliver, PCO?
Yeah, much like Stephen's saying there, unique character, a different style of wrestler to what ROH had at the time.
Yes.
The fans thoroughly supported him. So yeah, well worthy of being the ROH World Champion. Much like James Gibson, both had a point to prove. Obviously, the age difference was completely different, but definitely think that PCO was worthy of the ROH World Title, and I think it was more about him being the champion, winning the championship than being the champion. So, however long his reign was going to last, and obviously it's lasted as long as it has before ROH regained the title. Thoroughly worthy of being ROH World Champion, and it's your choice for him to be in the top 15. And
indeed,
I don't think, hand on heart, either me or Stephen can disagree with that choice.
Oh, excellent. So Oliver, your number 3 pick, please.
Yeah, my number 3 pick is CM Punk. This is the guy who come into the company with, a friend, Colt Cabana and Ace Steel, and, always had this serious demeanor, and then you find out he's straight edge and he's drug free and alcohol free and cigarette free, and it's just like, oh wait, that's me. So I can kind of relate to this guy, and then obviously he shoved it down people's throats, and I don't do that, but I could relate to him on some levels. And then you just hear his promos backstage, and talking about how Raven pissed it all away. Excuse the language if you're not allowed. And I was just, this guy's incredible. He was always there on promos. He then proved he could wrestle up a storm with Samoa Joe over the trilogy they had. When other people left, him and Samoa Joe stayed. So obviously had loyalty towards the company. And then it was announced that he was going to leave, and he had one last chance at the ROH World Title, Death Before Dishonor 3 against Austin Aries, who we've already mentioned. The fans are thoroughly with him, and then he wins the title, turns on him post-match, and he had them, because if you listen to the fan support all through the match, CM Punk had him in the palm of his hands. and then he was going to take the title to WWE, and Mick Foley's involved in the chase to stop him from taking the title. Stephen mentioned before, Roderick Strong had a match against him. Jay Lethal had a match against him. James Gibson's involved. Samoa Joe's involved. Christopher Daniels is involved. ROH against CM Punk. It's some of the best work of his career. It's one of the many Summer of Punks, in his career since that time. And it's just, it's just amazing. Sign of Dishonor, where he signs his WWE contract on the ROH World Title, and the fans, wanting to chase him out of the building with pitchforks, probably. He's just an incredible champion. Thoroughly deserved it. Got his moment in the sun, and took ROH to huge prominence because of Summer of Punk. So, probably could be a little bit higher in my list, but got a lot of love for James Gibson's run, so I'm going to go with CM Punk as my third choice.
Good pick. Stephen, any thoughts on CM Punk as the former Ring of Honor World Champion?
Yeah, I mean, Punk just took that championship after he'd been wrestling to try and win it for the year before against Samoa Joe, and when he won it from Austin Aries, it was such an incredible moment when he turned on all the fans. The match itself was incredible, and then the post-match promo was one of the best of his career. And what I loved about it was the first time really where the Ring of Honor World Championship had kind of been used as a storyline. It was very well done in that it was part of the storyline as well as part of the actual company, in the sense that it all hinged on if CM Punk, very much like the WWE echoed it with Money in the Bank, where if he leaves the company with the belt, what are they going to do? We can't have this happen. This is going to be Ring of Honor. What's going to happen to the company? And all the
new belt,
people
Steven, that's what they're going to do.
Yeah. It was very heated. It was a very historic time for the company. It was a short reign. It wasn't a very long reign, but in that short period of time, all the matches and all the moments were all memorable. And whenever you say the phrase to a Ring of Honor fan of the Summer of Punk, they instantly know what you're talking about, and they just can relate to it. And that urgency, there was just such a sense of urgency to win the championship back from Punk. It was like, we need to get the championship back. Who's going to do it? Who's going to win the belt? Who's going to, not even to hold it, just to get it back, more so than anything else, So yeah, definitely Punk needs to be in there as one of the flag bearers for being one of the greatest champions in Ring of Honor history.
Yeah, completely agree. So Stephen, I think it's your third pick.
Yes, has to be Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe was a man who had the Ring of Honor was built around, or the Ring of Honor World Championship, was built around Samoa Joe's Ring of Honor World Championship reign. We hear about the mythical reign of Bruno Sammartino's 7-year WWF reign in, the 60s and the 70s. And Samoa Joe, it was unheard of for a world champion in the early 2000s to hold a championship for, 600 odd days, what Samoa Joe held the Ring of Honor World Championship for. He was just an absolute monster. He tore everyone up. He faced everybody. He was at his peak in terms of his wrestling ability. He moulded a lot of himself on the Ring of Honor World Championship and held the belt like it was his life. And he wrestled in the UK against the Zebra Kid. He wrestled in Japan. He wrestled in Mexico, I believe, for the Ring of Honor World Championship. And of course, he had the historic and career defining feud against CM Punk, the Punk versus Joe trilogy, which at that point was seen as the second coming of Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair of, 89. It was that 2 hour-long draws and the final match at All-Star Extravaganza 2 or 3. I believe it was 2, if I'm right. I may be wrong there. But it just was a reign which cemented CM Punk as the Ring of Honor. He will always be the man who made the Ring of Honor World Championship what it is, in that it was all about longevity, it was all about respect, it was all about hard-hitting wrestling, and it was all about carrying a championship like you are, like it's your life. And that's what Samoa Joe got into people's mentality and people's sort of way of thinking about Ring of Honor. So he has to be up there as one of the top 15 Ring of Honor World Champions.
Oliver, your thoughts on Samoa Joe?
Yeah, basically Samoa Joe is pro wrestling. That's what he coined in Ring of Honor, and he kind of lived up to it every day as the ROH World Champion. But yeah, it wasn't just singles title defenses. One of the absolute best matches he had as the ROH World Champion was a cage match against one of the Briscoes, Jay Briscoe in this instance. Yeah. And it's a bloody, violent, brutal affair, and it's enthralling. But that's the kind of champion that Samoa Joe was. So we could have a wrestling classic with CM Punk, but then he could have a bloody cage match with Jay Briscoe. Obviously, wrestled up a storm against Austin Aries, before losing the title to him. He wrestled Christopher Daniels. He wrestled, he wrestled the who's who of ROH, and beat them all. Beat Paul London, obviously, at Death Before Dishonor. Paul London's last match in the company. Samoa Joe was, and will forever be pro wrestling, and well worthy of being in the top 15 of the ROH World Champions, and once again got to be somewhere in the top 3.
Yeah, really good pick. Big fan of Samoa Joe on the Wrestling with Johners podcast, most definitely. But my number 3 pick, I'll pick Kevin Steen, PCO. Now, my next pick is probably going to surprise people and make people scratch their heads ever so slightly as well. And another fairly recent champion. Now, it's similar to the reasons why I picked PCO for my second pick. I'm picking Cody Rhodes. Now, he was the Ring of Honor World Champion from June 2017. I think it was June 2017 when he won the championship over Christopher Daniels, and he held it for just shy of 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. But the match with Christopher Daniels was really, really good. But I think the reason why he's on my list is because I thought it was quite a definitive moment in Cody Rhodes' career after having 7 or 8 years in the WWE and kind of a tag team champion, but intercontinental champion. But he finished his career there under a bit of a cloud with that Stardust gimmick. But when he left WWE, he put out a tick box list of things he wanted to achieve. And I think more than anything, he just wanted to be taken seriously as a wrestler. And when he signed to ROH and eventually quite quickly became their world champion, I think that was the first step in Cody Rhodes' career to becoming a marketable name, a believable singles wrestler, and for the first time in his career, a world champion, which is something he always dreamed of. So I don't think Cody Rhodes will be in many people's top 5, top 15, top 20 maybe. But I think the reason why I put him in there is because this was the first step in Cody Rhodes' career to be taken seriously as a figurehead for a company. And we all know what he's gone on to achieve. I mean, since then, in was it August 2018, he won the NWA World Title at All In, and that was a bit of a card that was in association with Ring of Honor at the time. He's gone on to be one of the figureheads of AEW and one of the faces of AEW, and probably the biggest baby face that they have. And I think that when he left WWE and won the Ring of Honor World Championship, that was the first step that kind of helped to create the character of Cody that we're all familiar with now. So his reign may not have been too long or very memorable in many people's eyes, but I think for what it actually achieved for him and what it kick-started in his career, and what we've got now in 2.5, less than 3 years since that world title win, I think that it's bigger than the title win itself. It's bigger than the title reign itself in terms of what it started for that individual, what we have now in that personality of Cody / Cody Rhodes. So, gentlemen, your thoughts on my number 3 pick?
Yeah, Cody's a guy who I'd always been a huge fan of in WWE, and when he was released from the company, I originally saw him come into Impact, and I thought Impact Wrestling, and I thought because he made a tour of all the major promotions in one calendar year, but then he made his home in Ring of Honor, and he was such a marketable name from being a former sort of WWE star, and had such crowd support behind him that, much like sort of the PCO situation where he was going to at some point hold the championship, it was just inevitable. He again held the championship very much like a world champion. He brought in a different style to Ring of Honor. He was a lot more flamboyant, much like Dalton Castle in the sense he was a lot more flamboyant and a lot more sort of sports entertainer as opposed to traditional catch as can wrestler. But he was able to prove critics wrong, and he had some really strong performances in Ring of Honor, and he really did carve his name out in Ring of Honor as the world champion. And those crowds were, well behind him, either to love him or to hate him, because he really found his niche in Ring of Honor. And look at what he's gone on to now in AEW. If it hadn't have been for Ring of Honor giving him that confidence and that opportunity again, who knows what would have happened with AEW and All In. It was a very significant reign for different reasons, as opposed to holding a wrestling belt. It actually opened up doors to a new form of wrestling and a new company, which I think says a lot about a belt or a title.
Yeah. Oliver, are you a fan of Cody, and were you a fan of him as the Ring of Honor World Champion?
Well, like I said, this was part when I was a bit of a lapsed fan from Ring of Honor. So, in the WWE, I was always a fan. I remember seeing him in a tag match on Raw after WrestleMania. It was him and Hardcore Holly against Brian Kendrick and Paul London, and he always had something about him. And then, when he's like dashing Cody Rhodes when he broke his nose. That was a brilliant character, putting paper bags over people's heads and stuff. And then obviously Stardust went down the tubes and what have you. And then, like Stephen said, turned up in Impact Wrestling. You weren't sure if that was right for him, and then turned up in Ring of Honor with Kenny and Young Bucks and Marty and stuff. And yeah, it's not a title reign I'm familiar with, in all honesty. But, always deserved to be world champion. Always had that about him, had that dream and that ambition and aspiration to be the world champion. So, no, I'm just going to take what Stephen, the ROH expert, said, really, and kind of go with his opinion. It's one of those that I missed, but yeah, like you said, he's a ROH World Title reign led to All In, with all these companies working together to produce one of the greatest wrestling shows of the new millennium. He then went on to be the NWA World Champion, as you mentioned. And then, you can see what he's doing in All Elite Wrestling now. So him becoming ROH World Champion has spawned some of the most important decisions in professional wrestling in the last few years, really.
Indeed.
That's all I can say from the outside looking in.
There we go. So, Oliver, I think we're up to pick number 4 for you then, my friend.
Yeah, pick number 4 for me is going to be controversial, but, controversy creates cash. Eric Bischoff trademark. So, yeah, for me, it's going to be the second ever ROH champion and the all-round best Xavier. I'm surprised Stephen isn't booing, but that's kind of the ROH fans' response to this. So bear with me, and I'll explain it. You had somebody in the company who was an OG from the era of Honor Begins, and was in matches and was under the radar, having good matches, but kind of needed an edge. And then he just cornered Loki, who was the champion at the time, and asked him for a title shot. That was granted because Loki's an honourable champion. Then in the title match unscripted, Xavier swerves everybody, joins the prophecy of Christopher Daniels, and wins the ROH World Title in a really dishonorable, nefarious circumstance. And then from there, pretty much like the summer of Punk, everyone's trying to take the ROH title at the time away from Xavier and the Prophecy. You've got Jay Briscoe had a non-title match and then a title match. AJ Styles had a go. You had obviously Paul London had 2 attempts at it, including, these were tremendous matches where the fans were with bated breath begging for Paul London to win the title. So it kind of, and then that kind of went through, and then Xavier suffered a couple of concussions, but still wrestled. So you've got the respect aspect of things before losing the title to Samoa Joe. And what's really interesting about our picks is they seem to kind of go into one. Like when you're talking about one champion, they lost it to the previous champion that we're talking about. So it's really interesting how that happens. Yeah. But with Xavier, he was under the radar and was like most hated ROH world champion. At the time, and until probably Matt Taven, which Stephen will dispute. But, he had good matches. The crowd hated him. In hindsight, being 2020, he deserves a lot more respect than he was given as ROH champion, because I would imagine the attendances either stayed the same or went up because they wanted him to lose. I would compare him to like the $1 Million Man of ROH, really, without the title for Ted DiBiase. But you kind of understand and respect him more after the event than at the time. So those Paul London matches in particular, I've watched them recently, and I know Stephen has too. And they are tremendous matches, and the crowd is molten and desperate for a title change. And as a heel, a dishonorable champion and one who uses nefarious tactics, you want the fans to hate you. And, Xavier got the fans to hate him. So job done.
There we go. So, Stephen, your thoughts on Xavier and Oliver's 4th pick there?
Yeah, Xavier, one of the most influential Ring of Honor world champions, and really began that sort of prestige of holding the championship. And what I loved about him is, as Oliver mentioned, he was such a heel. Ring of Honor really, the fans really despised anybody who, didn't follow the code of honor or who did dastardly deeds in the ring. And Xavier was one of those guys who, did that, and the amount of hatred the fans had because this man who is, disrespecting the code of honor but is the world champion, it's kind of that paradox of he's got to hold up the code of honor because he's the world champion and the flag bearer, but that never came to be, so he definitely gave an interesting sort of aura compared with a lot of champions, and he helped the company grow during a time they were growing themselves, so it was historic in the sense of his own progression as a wrestler, but also Ring of Honor as a company. So definitely one of the most important and top 15 champions in Ring of Honor history.
Yeah, and not a wrestler that I'm particularly familiar with, but following this podcast, I'm definitely going to check him out and check out his reign for sure. But Stephen, I think it's your number 4 pick. So who have you got?
Yeah, so my number 4 pick is the franchise of Ring of Honor, Jay Lethal. Jay Lethal is a guy who, in the most recent years of Ring of Honor, has really carved himself out as one of the most important wrestlers in the company. Started out back in early 2004 as Hydro, and then has grown to become who he is today. His win for the Ring of Honor World Championship, which was actually recently shown on the Ring of Honor wrestling show against Jay Briscoe, is one of the most historic championship wins in the company history, because it was a dual championship match once again, much like Unified, where it was between the Ring of Honor World Champion and the Ring of Honor TV Champion. So Jay became a dual champion, and for several months wrestled as both the TV Champion and the World Champion on events. So he was doing a lot of double duty. So he was really putting himself and showing why he was the best in the world at the time. And he's a guy who, just at that point in 2015, when he won the championship for the first time, he's a 2-time world champion, but he really just had such awesome matches against, Adam Cole, Jay Briscoe, as I just mentioned. The match at Final Battle 2015 against AJ Styles is what in the former ECW arena was one of the best world championship matches in Ring of Honor history. He just held the championship much like a lot of traditional Ring of Honor World Champions, like it was his life, and it really meant so much to him to win it. And he said in the interview, which myself and Oliver reviewed for the Ring of Honor review, that when he won the belt, he was just stood in the middle of the ring and everything just went silent when he won the belt. And I think that moment of winning the belt and being given that opportunity and rolling with it was something which means so much to him. And he's carried the belt so well over the past, the company as well, for that matter, over the past 5 to 6 years, that he really does deserve a lot more acclaim, I feel, than what he gets. I feel that a lot of people, if they followed Ring of Honor during this modern era, would see just that he does match up with the Bryan Danielsons, with the Samoa Joes, and with the Nigel McGuinnesses in terms of his match quality and his promos. So he definitely has to be up there for me as one of the top 15.
Yeah, and I think his 2 title reigns combined add up to the most amount of days for Ring of Honor World Champion. 707 days combined is 2 reigns, so that's pretty impressive. And that's out of all the 26 previous champions, not including Jay Lethal. But a fantastic wrestler. I'm a big fan of his. But Oliver, your thoughts on Jay Lethal, and are you a fan? What's your thoughts on his 2 championship reigns?
Yeah, once again, this was during my lapsed fandom. So, going back way back to the beginning and stuff. Was a fan of Hydro, and then Jay Lethal, and then Samoa Joe's prodigy, Jay Lethal, and then not knowing too much about his title reigns and how the company was doing and stuff. I kind of dismissed it and said, well, you're the champion because a lot of other people have left. But when we did the Star Spotlight on Jay Lethal recently for the ROH review, and, the matches that Stevens talked about there against Jay Briscoe, and unfortunately, like the highlights of the AJ Styles match rather than the full match, you could see that he's kind of come into his own. He was part of the House of Truth at the time, and it really allowed him to, excel as a character, and he's always had really good in-ring work to go along with it. So, he's been the longest reigning champion in history over those 2 reigns, and I do believe if somebody could have come along to take the title, then he wouldn't have been. But by the same token, he carried the company on his back. And, we're still here at the 18th year anniversary, where hopefully that takes place this year. And Jay Lethal is a huge part of that.
Yeah, most definitely. And some other facts regarding Jay Lethal, he's the current tag team champion alongside Jonathan Gresham, of course. He was the 3rd ever Triple Crown champion in Ring of Honor history, the 3rd ever Grand Slam champion in Ring of Honor history, and the longest reigning Ring of Honor TV champion in their history as well. So a lot of credentials behind Jay Lethal. But my number 4 pick, now let's see where we are. Let's have a quick look down my list. Here we go. So my number 4 pick is a guy that's been mentioned one or two times as opponents to some of those that have been mentioned in the top 15 so far. And I've got Davey Richards. Only won the Ring of Honor World Championship just once, but his title reign was quite lengthy, around about 11 months, 321 days. And surprisingly, he beat his tag team partner Eddie Edwards for the championship back in June 2011 at the Best in the World 2011 from New York. And I know that he was in and around the world title picture of Ring of Honor for quite a while and had a few unsuccessful attempts at the world title before finally beating Eddie Edwards. And like I say, he held the title for 11 months, so getting on for a full year. He defended the championship against the likes of Roderick Strong. He had rematches against Eddie Edwards. He even had a classic 5-star match on March 2012 against Michael Elgin, eventually losing the championship to Kevin Steen at Border Wars in May of that year. So a hell of a champion, but not a champion that is on the kind of the forefront of everybody's mind when you think of Ring of Honor World Champions. Bit of an underrated champion, maybe a bit of a forgotten title reign in many people's opinion. But I think that for the length of his one and only Ring of Honor World Championship reign and the defenses, the people who went up against that 5-star match with Michael Elgin, I think it definitely is worth a mention, and he's number 4 in my top 5 and a worthy spot inside the ultimate top 15. But what do you think, Stephen? First of all, Davey Richards.
Yeah, Davey Richards had a very unfortunate reign, and as I was mentioning in terms of the history of the company, he became champion at a time when the company was going through the transition of being bought by Sinclair Broadcasting Group, and a lot of long-time Ring of Honor fans were becoming lapsed and fell out of love with the company, and I feel that really hindered Davey a lot, and his reign really suffered from it in terms of that. I feel a lot of fans were turned off to the product as a whole, and they missed out on a lot of great Davey Richards matches. I do feel that his chase for the championship did go a little bit too long, and I feel he could have had it a bit sooner. But the actual story arc to him winning the championship from Eddie Edwards in the Hammerstein and the Best in the World match was phenomenal. And then his actual matches against Roderick Strong, as you mentioned. He had a great match against Adam Cole, which doesn't get any mention at Rising Above 2012. He had another great match against Eddie Edwards at Final Battle 2011, which was awesome. El Generico at Glory by Honor 10 in Chicago, which was another great forgotten match. But as you mentioned, that I think he really the peak of his Ring of Honor wrestling or that World Championship reign was that match against Michael Elgin, Showdown in the Sun, Night 2 in 2012. Because one of the things what I think was special about that match as well, if you're watching it on screen as opposed to in the building, was, I mentioned this in a tweet recently, which Ian Riccoboni again put up, is that the emotion which former Ring of Honor World Champion Nigel McGuinness, who I put in my list, had on commentary because he became a commentator, had for that match, just elevated the performances so much, and the love and the passion which he had for wrestling came back so much. So it was such a wonderful thing to see on screen, and it's just one of those things where it adds so much to the performances, and the strong style which both competitors love from that All Japan, those All Japan matches between Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada and Kenta Kobashi came out in full force, and the crowd were just on fire for the whole thing. And I feel that it was really where Davey proved, you've put me down for so long as a world champion, I'm going to prove why I'm the best in the world and why I am the world champion. And him and Elgin just tore it up, and that match alone is enough reason for him to be on this list for me, because I feel that if you haven't seen that match and you're listening to this podcast, you need to find a way to watch it, because it's not like any other match you'll see ever. And I believe, like I said in that tweet, that it was the best commentary performance of the past decade from Kevin Kelly and Nigel McGuinness, which elevated it even more so. So Davey definitely deserves to be in this top 15.
Yeah, and Oliver, your thoughts on Davey Richards? Was this during that time when you were a bit of a lapsed fan? I don't know if you've caught up on his reign, but your thoughts on his reign as the world champion?
Well, I thought as soon as you mentioned Davey Richards versus Michael Elgin that Stephen would talk for the rest of the podcast. So because I know how much he loves that match. Yeah, Davey, which I saw him back in 2006 and pinpointing him as being potentially a world champion back then. So that was August 2006. And obviously he didn't reach the pinnacle until 5 years later. So I was a Lapsed fan. I think, I've always been a fan of Davey Richards. Love the intensity, love his wrestling ability. Like Stephen said, it's probably during that time, that ROH wasn't pulling the trigger on guys, and that might be the reason why his reign's kind of underrated. But to go along with what Stephen said, that showdown in the Sun Night 2 match against Michael Elgin is incredible. And yeah, that alone makes it, that's a 5-star match, isn't it? I know we've gone stupid with 6 stars and 6.5 stars and 6/4 stars and whatever else. And it is a good barometer of what a great match is. I'm not going to slate Dave Meltzer too much, but that was an incredible match. And just for that match alone, and for everything he did in ROH, title reign or non-title reign, I think he's worthy of being in the top 15.
Right, so we're on the home stretch now. So Oliver, your fifth and final pick then, please.
Yeah, with my fourth pick, I picked the dishonorable champion. So my fifth, I'm going to pick the first ever and most honorable champion, Loki. So he had a fantastic debut in Ring of Honor against the aforementioned American Dragon Bryan Danielson and the guy we haven't mentioned so far, Fallen Angel Christopher Daniels. They had a brilliant round robin challenge. Loki and Bryan Danielson tore it up in the main event with Ken Shamrock as the guest referee. And then, he was building himself up. So he had a fantastic match against AJ Styles and then won the title in the searing heat of the Philadelphia Murphy Rec Center in middle of July, which must have been like hell on earth. Not the match, the temperature. 60-minute Ironman match against Spanky, Doug Williams, and the aforementioned Christopher Daniels. Won the title and then defended it in a classic against AJ Styles in August on Honor Invades Boston, before losing it in nefarious circumstances against the dishonorable champion, who became Xavier. So low-key helped ROH be put on the map, really. If it wasn't for his 1/3 part in the Era of Honor Begins main event, which me and Stephen have recently talked about on the last ROH review up until this point, actually. He was incredibly important. And although his title reign didn't last too long, I think the work before it and during it, and then kind of how he moved the title on to somebody, and then obviously Xavier moved it on to Samoa Joe. So I think he played his part in establishing the ROH title before it became the world title, and is one of the most important ROH champions of all time.
Yeah, definitely. And to think that he's still doing the business now, still kicking ass. All these years later, 18 years later, I think he was in his early 20s when he became Ring of Honor World Champion. I think he's probably 23, maybe 24 at the very most. And he's wrestled for every promotion imaginable, hasn't he? Really, even appeared briefly as Caval in WWE. I think it was around about 2011, and I think he won the second series of NXT. Didn't really have much of a run after that, but he's still producing the goods. And like you say, it was quite a short championship reign. I mean, the very first Ring of Honor show, he main evented and won that show, and then, like I say, was the first ever champion. But I've got a lot of respect for Low Ki. But Stephen, your thoughts on Low Ki? And like I say, he kind of set the groundworks for Ring of Honor, you could say.
Yeah, Low Ki definitely is one of those wrestlers who needs to be mentioned in his top 15. Ring of Honor World Champions. He in 2002 was one of the best wrestlers in the world, and he was the best wrestler in Ring of Honor. Completely unique. His ferocious kicks and his intensity are like nobody else you'll see, especially in those early years of Ring of Honor. And his reign, although it wasn't, again, full of the historic sort of defenses and, you know, the amazing sort of length or anything, it set the groundwork for everyone to follow. And he, you know, Ring of Honor was built upon, you know, Low-Ki's performances, much like Bryan Danielson and Christopher Daniels' performance in that first match at the Era of Honor Begins, the first main event, I should say, sorry. And he deserved the belt. He deserved to carry the company through that early period of 2002. And, you know, it was a reign which will always be in the, you know, etched due to it being the first Ring of Honor World Title reign. And the Iron Man match, how they wrestled for 60 minutes in that searing heat, I have no idea, because, you know, it was. I've seen the full match, and I don't know how they did it, because it's just like 60 minutes is a feat of endurance, but then you add in the heat and you add in there's another two guys, let alone, you know, just being two guys in there. It's so far altogether. It just kind of baffles you how they were able to carry on for an hour. But definitely a champion who needs to be in this list for what he, you know, his influence. Low-Ki definitely needs to be in this list.
Totally agree. And Stephen, your fifth and final pick, please.
Yeah, so when I actually typed up my top 20 list, there was a wrestler who I missed off completely, and I feel shameful with myself that I missed him off, but it has to be my last pick, which is Takeshi Morishima. Takeshi Morishima was a guy who came from Pro Wrestling Noah, and for a lot of his Ring of Honor run, to start with, he was a guest appearance, and much like Kenta and Naomichi Marufuji would make guest appearances for the company, attraction matches, but Morishima was able to, you know, come to Ring of Honor and to North America to sort of gain a lot more experience in the company. And he was then given the opportunity to hold the Ring of Honor World Championship. He defeated Homicide at the 50-year festival. And Morishima was just, his reign was very much like Samoa Joe's, in that he was just an unstoppable wrecking ball force of a champion. You know, he was violent, he was brutal, he was scary. As a champion, he was scary because he just was athletic, but he was heavy, he was just dangerous. And the feuds he had with Nigel McGuinness and in Bryan Danielson in particular were some of the most heated in the history of Ring of Honor. And the one he had with Bryan Danielson was always the one which always sticks out, especially the matches he had Manhattan Mayhem, where he caused Bryan Danielson's detached retina. And then following that, the match they had at Man Up, the Ring of Honor pay-per-view, where Danielson wrestled with an eye patch and Morishima went after the eye, and the crowd were, much like with Xavier, were out for his blood, you know, because how they be so dishonourable to this man and try to blind him. You know, it was very old school heat kind of wrestling, and Morishima just held the championship. He was the first Japanese champion in the history of Ring of Honor, and he was a man who then went over to Japan and wrestled over in Japan for Noah for the Ring of Honor World Championship. He defended it over there. He was a historic champion, and when Nigel McGuinness finally did defeat him for the championship at Undeniable on pay-per-view, again, it was a great passing of the torch. There was the handshake, there was the bow from Morishima, there was the respect there. So it was kind of a very roller coaster-esque reign, but one which was very historical in the sense of a lot of factors. So Morishima, I think, definitely has to be on this list.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. And similar to Xavier, another wrestler that I'm not terribly familiar with, but Oliver, Morishima, are you familiar with him? And what did you think of his title reign?
Yeah, if you want to get familiar with him, John, we put a ROH match on our YouTube between the American monster, so we'll have Samoa Joe, and the Japanese monster, Takeshi Morishima, and that's probably all you need to be,
check it out.
to get to know him. Those two balls going at it, it's pretty supremely amazing. But yeah, Morishima coming to the company as a guest star, as Stephen has said, be a truly honourable champion in Homicide, who had really scratched and clawed to become the ROH World Champion, and excuse me, and he had it taken away from him. Then Morishima went on a tear through the roster until Nigel McGuinness got a hold of him, and obviously he won the title then and took it forward. But yeah, Morishima is undeniably amazing athletically for a big man. He had that aura about him, like Stephen has said. He's scary. He's scary good in the ring, and pretty scary just in stature. And those aforementioned matches against Bryan Danielson are some of the most brutal matches you'll see. And just going back to low key, just really quickly, in terms of seeing a great low key match, low key against Samoa Joe, Fight Without Honor from Gloria Barner in 2002 is another match to check out, John. But yeah, Morishima is, I can't believe that he wasn't on Stephen's list, really, but it just goes to show you the caliber of ROH World Champions, really. But yeah, Morishima is incredibly important and definitely worthy of being in the top 15.
Yeah, I think possibly like a lot of my listeners after this podcast, I'm going to go and check out quite a bit more ROH content, certainly the matches and the individuals you've recommended. So this has been an education for me. But my number 5 pick, my 5th and final pick, I'm going with 2-time Ring of Honor World Champion Jay Briscoe. So some might consider Jay as more of a tag team wrestler. Of course, he's synonymous in his tag team, the Briscoe brothers, with his brother Mark. But Jay is a former 2-time Ring of Honor World Champion with a combined number of days, 375 days amongst his 2 reigns. So he was the man that dethroned Kevin Steen after his lengthy reign, with Jay's first reign lasting only 3 months. He did have successful title defences against the likes of Adam Cole, his own brother Mark Briscoe, Matt Hardy, until he was stripped of the title after suffering an injury which kept him out of action for 6 months. When he did return from injury, he got into a feud with Adam Cole, which culminated in a unification ladder match, I understand, which Cole won. However, in September 2014, Briscoe did win his second ROH World Title, defeating Michael Elgin in the start of a lengthy 286-day reign, his second reign, where he finally lost the championship to Jay Lethal the following June in 2015. So my number 5 pick and the final entry into our ultimate top 15 is Jay Briscoe. So Oliver, your thoughts on Jay Briscoe and my number 5 pick? Sorry.
Yeah, another instance where I was a Laps fan, so you probably need Stephen's opinion, but I'll try. Much like Jay Lethal, we said this on the show and stuff. Not sure if he would have been ROH World Champion if there was someone else, and that's not meant in a disrespectful way. I got a lot of time and respect for Jay Briscoe. But after watching the star spotlight on the Briscoe brothers, got even more respect for them. Siblings growing up wanting to be wrestlers and champions and stuff, and then actually seeing some of the matches that he was involved in to become the ROH World Champion on those 2 occasions that you've mentioned. You talked about it. Well, you haven't talked about it on here, but we talk about it from like WCW days and stuff, and the cruiserweights making it through and what have you. And this is much like Jay Lethal, one of those instances where guys from so-called lower down the card had made it through and smashed the glass ceiling, and you've got to be happy with that as a fan, I think. So Jay Briscoe is really worthy of being in the top 15. Like I said, I was a Laps fan, but I'm sure Stephen will back up the claim of him being in the top 15.
Stephen, give us your thoughts on Jay Briscoe as a former Ring of Honor World Champion.
Yeah, Jay Briscoe fought in the first ever Ring of Honor match against Amazing Red, true Ring of Honor original. Since then, wrestled, with Brother Mark throughout the entire history of Ring of Honor. Made his name as a tag team champion, the greatest Ring of Honor tag team champion with his brother, and then breaking out into the singles sort of singles matches was something which a lot of people were surprised about, I think, including myself at that point. He'd always been the bridesmaid, never been the bride, in the sense that he'd fought for the championship for so long. And that moment when he finally won the belt in the Hammerstein Ballroom against Kevin Steen, I'm not ashamed to say this on air as well, that I did cry, because he was a man who I had a heck of a lot of respect for. And that feud between himself and Kevin Steen and the history between those teams and that match wasn't the greatest technical match or the greatest match in terms of 5-star classics, but the emotion and the history was so heated but yet so wonderful. It was something where you felt proud to be a fan of a company for so long and followed two men who've grown and are both world champions. And from there, Jay just went on a tear then. He had the great matches against Adam Cole. He had, as you mentioned, BJ Whitmer, Matt Hardy. His promos are always heated and wonderful. And then again, when he lost the championship due to injury, the bitterness it incorporated into the storyline. So a lot like the Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon situation back in '94 with the fake belt and the true Intercontinental Champion, as you mentioned, with the ladder match for the 2 belts, that storyline arc. And then, from there, he then won the belt finally against Elgin in Canada, and the crowd and himself were shocked. I'll always remember that expression, what Jay had when he won the title for a second time, the shock on his expression, like, oh my God, I'm second time world champion, what's happening? It was just a great time, and Jay then again went on another great reign with the matches again against Adam Cole, the matches against Roderick Strong, Jay Lethal, as we mentioned. He really paid his dues. He really held the championship like a great world champion, a rounded individual, a rounded wrestler, put the time and the effort in, and definitely deserves to be on this list as one of the top 15 Ring of Honor World Champions.
Yeah, so let's go through the top 15 there. So Oliver's 5 picks were Austin Aries, James Gibson, CM Punk, Xavier, and Low Key. Stevens were Bryan Danielson, Nigel McGuinness, Samoa Joe, Jay Lethal, and Takeshi Morishima. And mine, I started with Kevin Steen, going into PCO, then Cody, Davey Richards, and Jay Briscoe. So that's our top 15. Guys, what do you think of our 15 picks? I think it's a pretty solid list. I mean, you haven't got Tyler Black in there or Adam Cole. I'm sure, had we have created a top 20 or maybe had longer to talk about it, we probably would have included them. But a pretty handy top 15, I think. Oliver, your thoughts on our list as a whole?
I think what's really strange about it is the people who are not in the list, as you just mentioned. But it just goes to show how important the ROH title or world title, as it become, is in the professional wrestling landscape. You are somebody if you've been ROH World Champion, and some of the people who are not in the list who deserve to be in the list, but obviously it's opinion. But then the people who have made it into the top 15 list, hopefully they see this as being a huge accolade.
Yeah, indeed. And Stephen, your thoughts on the list that we've created?
Yeah, I think it's as complete as it could be. I think one thing what's telling is that we've chosen champions from the entire history of the company. We haven't, chosen champions from a particular period of time. I mean, one of the advantages of Ring of Honor World Champions is they do have very long reigns for, in some cases, a year or, 6 months. So it does help to show a period of time in a company. So I think it kind of, if anyone wants to get acquainted with Ring of Honor throughout its entire history. You could pick any of these reigns for a particular year, and you could see, not only the champion's reign, but also around that the particular the company at that particular time. So yeah, I think it's as complete as it could be. So no qualms at all.
Absolutely. But I think I mentioned at the top of the show, I mean, ROH has got a long and storied career history. It's been going for 18 years. But, when you look at talent that have come through Ring of Honor and not been their world champion, they might have won other championships amongst, in their stay with Ring of Honor. But are there any kind of wrestlers that have had quite a storied career in Ring of Honor that didn't quite get the big bout, that didn't have the opportunity as world champion, that's maybe surprising to you when you look back at it? Any wrestlers that kind of jump out at you? I mean, starting with you, Oliver, anybody in particular you thought should have had their opportunity as a Ring of Honor world champion?
Well, in all honesty, this one's going to shock you all to the core. I wonder who he's going to pick. Paul London, obviously. He, since debuting in the company and quite quickly becoming a fan favourite, showing he's a daredevil who will risk it all in that aforementioned street fight against Michael Shane with the broken ladder and the shooting star press. Those incredible matches he had against Xavier that I mentioned in Xavier's part of this podcast. Incredible triple threat match with Loki and AJ Styles from the first anniversary show, which is one of the best triple threat matches that you'll ever see. And then, he just couldn't get to the pinnacle. And like I said before, he lost to Samoa Joe on his last night in the company, first time around. He's come back since. Me and Stephen have talked about this. Davey Richards landed on his face at Border Wars. And then he was in the ROH World Title Tournament, wrestled Roderick Strong and Michael Elgin. I think the Strong match was on TV and the Elgin match was in the tournament, and was due to come back in some capacity at past versus present before it got cancelled on the day before, much to my chagrin. So a healthy, well-rested Paul London who wants to be involved in wrestling because he's now chasing an acting dream, which is more power to him. Back in 2002, 2003, could have easily been ROH champion and would have been well worthy of it. And could have been ROH World Champion in the aforementioned title tournament. And he can still go. It's just whether he wants to. So if Paul London was to rejoin the ROH roster in 2020, that is a goal, an aspiration, and a dream on his mind, and it would be fantastic to see him fulfill it.
Yeah, that would be another fairy tale kind of story, really, wouldn't it? We've spoken about Cody and PCO and, achieving their dreams after being in the business for so many years. And that would be a great fairy tale for Paul London. But what about yourself, Stephen? Any kind of wrestlers that really jump out at you as kind of getting so close, being in the title picture so many times, but never quite getting the big one?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely several. The phenomenal AJ Styles was a guy who, was in Ring of Honor for several years, had great Ring of Honor World Championship matches, but never was able to win the big one. Made his name in TNA and in New Japan in the latter part of his career, and now obviously is in WWE. So he never won that big World Championship in Ring of Honor, which I think has always disappointed me. But he's made up for it in other companies, thankfully. Jimmy Rave, who was part of the Embassy, who is definitely the most hated heel in the history of Ring of Honor, was a guy who at one point would have made a fantastic evil Ring of Honor World Champion. He would have definitely brought another level of character and disdain for the champion in the company, which I think would have been really exciting and different for a time when it was all about respect and all about, you know, good sportsmanship and the code of honor and things. So there's definitely Jimmy Rave. And the last man who really stands out to me.
Stephen, one second. You've got to tell John about the fact that when he was in a wrestling ring, the fans pelted toilet paper at him.
Yeah, yeah. So instead of streamers being thrown at him, as is tradition in Japanese wrestling and Ring of Honor, the Ring of Honor fans would be kind enough to throw toilet paper as streamers on Jimmy Rave and the Embassy, just to show how they hated he was.
Not nowadays, because we it's a rare commodity, toilet paper. So
it's just sacred. It's sacred. And the last wrestler who always stands out to me, who I think would have made a great world champion had he been given the chance, was Jimmy Jacobs, son of a Jimmy. But Jimmy Jacobs became the leader of the Age of the Fall. So around September 2007, he led probably the most prominent heel stable in the history of Ring of Honor in the Age of the Fall, which Tyler Black, aka Seth Rollins, was also part of. And his character and his his aura would have lent itself so well to being a heel character in Ring of Honor. Like, even if he didn't have a long reign as world champion, just for him to win the belt once would have been brilliant, you know. And he had a great feud before that with BJ Whitmer, which again was very heated and very violent. And I think he definitely earned the right to be a Ring of Honor world champion. It just never really came to be. So they're definitely the three guys, I would say, who I was always disappointed have never held the Ring of Honor World Championship. AJ Styles, Jimmy Rave, and Jimmy Jacobs.
Well, there we go. Listen, gentlemen, Oliver and Stephen, I've had you for long enough, but it's been a real blast and a ride through the history of Ring of Honor. I've certainly learned a lot, and I've really enjoyed with you two presenting our top 15, our ultimate Ring of Honor World Champions, and it's been good fun. I hope you two have enjoyed it too. But before we let you go, it's an opportunity for you to throw out any plugs, any social media handles, any books, any podcasts, where we can find you, where we can reach out to you and say hi. But Stephen, do you want to kick us off with any handles or anything you want to throw out to my listeners, any plugs where we can get in touch, reach out and say hi?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Unlike our podcast, you can find me on Twitter at SteeJ215. As we used to mention in the early days of the ROH review, if you have any hate mail, you can send that across my way, or any hatred for Ring of Honor, you can send it my way at SteeJ215. And you can also find my writings with the Wrestling Estate. So I write for a wrestling news website called The Wrestling Estate. So you can find us on Twitter at The Wrestling EST. My most recent article was a top 10 WCW Cruiserweight champions of all time. And before that, I had an exclusive interview with Southern Pro Wrestling New Zealand star Will Power. So yeah, you can definitely find me on there. So each week we cover WWE, TNA, Ring of Honor. We have a monthly newsletter, and each week we take part in a weekly roundtable where we each get a set of questions and answer them, and we all contribute to the topic. So that's where I'd say to check me out.
And Oliver.
Yeah, and for myself, I'm a free-time pro wrestling author. I've done a book on British wrestling with ROH elements in it, so that's the fan's perspective, one man's exploration of British wrestling. I've done a WWE book with ROH fingerprints on it, so that's called A Fan's Perspective, 2016, What a Year to Be a Fan of WWE. And I've done a WrestleMania 24 kind of Paul London fantasy booking. I was in Orlando for the ROH Double Shot book, which is A Fan's Perspective, How My Lifelong Dream Became a Nightmare. And yeah, if this is the same instance to talk about the Twitter for the ROH review and stuff, definitely send your hate mail to DJ215. But for the ROH review, we are on Twitter at ROH Review. We are on Instagram at ROH Review. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/ROH Review 2019. We have a YouTube channel that hopefully you'll put in the description, John.
Indeed.
And we have an email for suggestions, comments, and feedback, which is rohreview@outlook.com.
There we go. It's absolutely fantastic. And as you mentioned, I will put as many of those links and handles into the description of this podcast. Just click into the description and you'll find everything there to get to know and say hi to Oliver and Stephen and all their great work at one click away. But thank you, gentlemen. I really, really appreciate your time and your effort and your contribution to this very special episode. Like I say, at the very top of the episode, I said there's two things I haven't done. Haven't spoken much about Ring of Honor in all 130 plus episodes of Wrestling with Johners, and certainly haven't done an episode where we kind of look at a particular championship and try to boil down the best champions within that championship. So I really, really enjoyed this with you, gentlemen. And if I decide to do a Ring of Honor episode sometime in the future, I'd love to get you two back on. But there we go. Thank you.
No, welcome. Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
We'd love to do that.
Just before we go, just got to mention this as well. As you've had Nick and Chris on, we're so very proud to be part of the Broken but Glorious Wrestling Podcast Network.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for them and obviously the listeners and stuff, the growth wouldn't be as good as it's been. So thank you to Broken but Glorious Wrestling Podcast and to everyone who supported the ROH review. I mean, we wouldn't be here on a Friday night talking to you for 2.5 hours about Ring of Honor if, those things hadn't happened. So we're very humbled that everyone supported us from November 2019.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, the whole team at Broken but Glorious do a fantastic job. So I recommend all my listeners to go and check out all of the shows there as part of the team. But please keep it tuned to the Wrestling with Johners podcast. And if you've enjoyed listening to this show, please don't forget to spread the word. Tell your friends and tell your family. Don't forget to hit that ever important subscribe button on whatever channel you're listening to this on. Or if you're watching it on YouTube, so please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on a single episode. But once again, thanks to Oliver and thanks to Steve for being a fantastic guest on the Wrestling with Johners podcast. Thanks to everybody for listening. Enjoy your weekend and we'll catch up with you all again soon.